What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for coming back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle. So if you have no idea what this movie is, this is the darker take on the famous story of the Jungle Book. Obviously Disney has popularized it with, songs and cutesiness, with both their animated film and the live action, a little bit darker take that they did a couple years back that came out in theaters. This movie and the Disney one were announced around the exact same time, and I remember being kind of surprised by that because I was thinking to myself, why would they want to go up against Disney on releasing a Jungle Book movie in theaters that was going to tell generally the same story but just in a darker way? It just didn't make too much sense to me. So before I get too much deeper into that, this is Andy Serkis's directorial debut. If you don't know who Andy Serkis is, he's famous for playing Gollum in the Lord of the Rings films. He plays Supreme Leader Snoke in the latest Star Wars trilogy. He's played Caesar in the Planet of the Apes films, King Kong in the Peter Jackson King Kong. He's pretty well known for being the motion capture king. So when I heard that he was going to be directing this and that he was going to have stars like Christian Bale, Cate Blanchett, himself, and Naomie Harris, all in this film doing motion capture, I was very, very excited because I knew that there was going to be something very interesting brought to this film just with his expertise attached to it. So like I mentioned before, this film and the Disney Jungle Book film were announced at the exact same time, and Disney beat them to the punch. They released the film far earlier than Andy Serkis and his team, and I remember thinking to myself, what is going to happen to that Jungle Book movie that Andy Serkis is working on? Well, this past year they announced that it was going to release on Netflix, so I was pretty surprised by that. I was kind of bummed by it as well because I wanted to see it on the big screen. I wanted to be able to see another Jungle Book movie on the big screen itself. Though Disney is working on a sequel to their Jungle Book. I'm not going to be talking about that other Jungle Book movie too much. I may do a little comparison at the end of the video just to kind of do that, but it's not necessarily fair, I would say, to do that because this movie very much is its own thing. So like I mentioned before, this is a much darker take on the story of the Jungle Book. A lot of the big plot points that you know from the Disney versions, or just the story overall are there. But yeah, this one is definitely, I think, more in line with the tale that came out far before Disney popularized the story with the animated feature. There's no songs in this. There's no like hokey pokey feeling about this one. It is a much darker and just grounded take on the story. Now, with that said, one of the things I really enjoyed about the film that some people may not enjoy about it is the visual look of this film. It is distinctly different from the one that Disney put out, where theirs was a little bit more hyper realistic. There's a lot of scenes where the animals look incredibly real, and though they're speaking, they still look incredibly real. In this movie, the CGI and the overall look of the film is very much, everything feels cohesive. Everything looks great within the film and the world that Andy Serkis built. But the one thing that I'll say that's definitely different is that the animals are a lot more animated, I guess is the way you could say it. Their faces are far more expressive because of the fact that they went for a more artistic style, a more unique look on the animals and the CG given to them than making them look hyper realistic. Some of the animals in this film that have a different look and different art style, and the most unique looking ones to me because of this change of art style, would easily be the wolves, Baloo, and Shere Khan. Shere Khan specifically because he's got a very almost, I want to say, like Chinese style art drawing as far as like his eyes and just the way his overall body looks. It reminded me a lot of Asian artwork and the ways you'd see different like lions and tigers drawn, if that makes any sense. And I personally really enjoyed this. Though the CGI looked a little bit more cartoony than the other version, I think that it gave it its own distinct and unique look. I think that the film never took itself overly serious while also trying to give you a darker take on the overall world. And the CG and the look of it all felt cohesive with everything else that surrounded it. Nothing ever really like stood out to me as like, oh, that's bad CG. It always felt like an artistic choice to make the animals look more expressive, I guess is what I could really say. They look a lot more animated, but it allows them to convey more emotion than I think the Disney Jungle Book allowed the animals in that movie to do that. I really enjoyed Andy Serkis in this film as a director. I think for his first film, he did a great job. And he also plays the character Baloo, and I loved the different take on Baloo in this film. Like I mentioned before, there is no singing in this film, so you do not have Baloo going around singing bare necessities in this one. He's a lot more of a drill sergeant in this movie. When we start the film, both him and Bagheera are already with the wolf pack, and Baloo is essentially their drill sergeant. He trains the wolves, similar to how Bagheera did in the Disney version, but in this one it was a lot more heavily focused on Baloo doing that. He's got just a very rough voice, a very rough personality. He's got scars across his face, and I really enjoyed the take on Baloo in this film. Very distinctly different, and I think that it made for some really awesome and unique scenes. And I was actually really surprised to walk away from this film and have some of my favorite Jungle Book moments, I think, of all time be in this film. You know, I didn't expect that. I thought it was going to be a good time. I was hooked into this movie the whole time. There is a lull I'll talk a little bit about later on in the review, but yeah, I was really hooked into this movie the entire time that it was on. Some of my favorite moments, I think, for on-screen Jungle Book adaptations were in this movie. I think that they brought such a unique take to certain things that some of my favorite action and visuals overall were done in this film more than any of the other Jungle Book adaptations. Now, as far as my negatives go for this film, I don't really have too many, except that a few elements of the film throughout it feel rushed, and it almost feels as if they're like, oh, you know the story of the Jungle Book, so we don't really need to fill these gaps for you, which kind of felt like, you know, just rushed. I only have about 2 other negatives that I had for myself while watching this movie. Like I mentioned, I really enjoyed it. I had a great time with it throughout the entire runtime, and there's some great action, some great visuals, and I enjoyed the characters a lot. The acting across the film is fantastic, and you know, thank God for Andy Serkis's, you know, expertise as far as motion capture, because I feel the actors they were all there. I could see all of these actors that played these characters. I could see their eyes and their faces in these characters, you know, in these animal characters. So I really enjoyed that element. As far as negatives go, the only other 2 that I have, I would say, were that I wasn't a huge fan of Mowgli in this film, and not necessarily the actor who portrayed him. He did have a few moments where I wasn't like a huge fan of his acting, but I think for a child actor, he did a really good job, and he has a cool look. There were definitely some moments with him where he had a very dark and sinister look, and he's a different take on the character. Now, one thing I didn't like about him sometimes is he's just a little bit more whiny and complaining, and didn't feel as much as somebody who in the other versions would eventually kind of stand up on his own and do his own thing. Like he does in this movie eventually, because that's the story, but it just doesn't feel as powerful as in previous adaptations. But that's not to say it's like terrible. It's just like one of the negatives that I have. And the only other negative I have, which is also part of one of the things that make this film unique in its telling, is that this film actually takes time to go into the human village. The previous installments that we've had, the animated version and in the latest Disney version, didn't really spend too much time in the human village. You know, they would talk about it, you would see it from afar, it was used as like a plot device, but it was never somewhere that they actually went and actually spent time inside of. And that was something that I was actually really pleasantly surprised and happy to see in this movie, that they actually went and you know, went a little deeper into. But with that said, I would say that's where the big lull of the film happens for me. As soon as they get to the human village, you know, not too long into it, I was bored. There are some impactful moments, especially near the end of the time in the human village. There's one scene in particular that really stands out as far as being in the human village, where it makes it all worth it. But there's definitely a lull there. It felt a little bit like there was a bit of a drag there compared to the rest of the film. And I'd say that those things that I mentioned are really my only negatives. I really enjoyed this film. I think it was really well done, visually, acting, and directing. It was a really fun movie. I really had a lot of fun with it. I hope Andy Serkis directs more films like this, because I feel like he really just has an eye for motion capture and such a talent for it that I think a lot of other directors don't have, because they don't have that expertise. One of the last things I want to say about this movie is that because it is a darker take on this story and it has to do with animals, like I mentioned, some of the action is great to me, but I know I have heard from others, and I've read some reviews online, that a lot of the violence in this movie was a little bit hard to watch for people who really struggle with watching animals be hurt, which I can totally understand. So I would say that is my warning to anybody who struggles with seeing animals hurt or seeing a darker take on things, you know, specifically even just animal to animal violence. It is a rough film to watch in that sense. I wouldn't say overly rough, don't expect anything too violent, but there are some scenes with some animals being hurt and killed that are a lot darker, is what I'll say, a lot more violent and dark than previous adaptations of the story. So yeah, that would be my only warning as far as this film goes for anybody who kind of struggles with that kind of a story and visuals. So yeah guys, that's gonna be my review for Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle. It's on Netflix right now. I highly recommend going and giving it a watch. I think it makes itself very, very different from the Jungle Book movies we've gotten before, and I think it definitely stands on its own in that way. It doesn't feel like a ripoff or, you know, something that just shouldn't exist. I really, really enjoyed this take on the story, and I want to know what you guys thought. So leave your comments down below. Let me know what you thought about the movie. Make sure you hit that like button, comment, subscribe, hit the little bell icon, share these videos across the interwebs to all your friends. I would really, really appreciate it, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye!